Hey guys, welcome back to Teen Muscle Radio and episode number 20. So today we are joined by a very, very special guest, and it feels kind of surreal talking to this guy because I've been following him for so long. But yeah, today we are joined by Alberto Nunez of Team 3DMJ, and I'm sure that plenty of you, or most of you at least, will definitely know of Alberto. But anyway, if sort of you guys have been again sort of living under a rock in terms of natural bodybuilding, then Alberto, I'll let you sort of give a brief introduction about who you are, and yeah, go for it.
All right. Well, I've been bodybuilding for a very long time. Um, Very long time. I've been lifting weights since I was 16 years old, and that was one of those things where I didn't even expect I'd like it. It was just something that I was always encouraged to do with sports, but I always found a way to like not find myself in the weight room. Um, and then my first actual honest go during some one idle summer, I was like, wow, this was meant for me. And then it became something that I just felt like the sports that I picked anyways, there wasn't enough time dedicated to weights, at least not the way I wanted to lift weights. And that became kind of an issue because I wasn't really looking forward to my sports anymore. I was looking more forward to time spent in the weight room and getting stronger and progressing.
Yep.
Yeah, I've been lifting since I was 16. I think 19 is when I decided that, hey, you know what, these other sports they're just not making me as happy as they once were. I think we'll only lift weights. And from that point onwards, it's been, I wouldn't say super bodybuilding specific, but I think fairly early on I knew that being a competitive bodybuilder is what I wanted to do, and perhaps a natural bodybuilder. When I first started, it just wasn't very popular. It was kind of an oxymoron, a natural bodybuilder, right? And there wasn't too much influence, or at least, like positive testimonials as to like why you should. And somehow along the way, I'm like, okay, this is it. This is what I'm going to. I'm going to keep it natural, stay natural, make it very, very hard to gain muscle. However, I feel that between like ages 16 to now I'm 33. Even though I haven't put on as much muscle as I would have had I taken the other route, I think in regards to what that has allowed me to learn, and therefore contribute and help others, just far exceeds anything that I think I could have done via the other route, no matter how much success I would have had in it. And nowadays I roam the natural bodybuilding plains with my cowboy friends at 3D Muscle Journey. And that's Eric Helms, Andrea Valdez, Brad Loomis, and Jeff Alberts, all respected, well-established coaches in the natural bodybuilding and powerlifting world as well. And with Andrea now grid too.
Yeah, awesome. That was a brilliant introduction, and like I said, I'm sure that plenty of people know you and already follow you. You tend to be you're very widely followed, especially on Instagram. You could almost be sort of called Instagram famous. So like I said, I'm sure people know you already, but that was a great introduction. So my first sort of question is, just can you give the listeners just a little bit of context behind your competitive career, and maybe just focus on the very, very beginnings, the humble beginnings of your bodybuilding endeavors, especially with regards to just competing as opposed to lifting. So maybe just touch on your first few competitive outings and potentially just briefly how they went.
I recall that, as soon as I stopped sports, or other sports rather, I needed to do something competitively. Like, just those pickup basketball games I was partaking in just didn't really quench that. I recall wanting to compete at NPC nationals, teen NPC nationals out here. But I am I won't say I'm an over analyzer, but I'd love to be overly prepared. And it was my last year as a teen, and I didn't feel that I would go in there and do as well as I would have hoped. So
Yeah.
after that, I just kept falling victim to the same thought process where, the time in the year where I'd have to jump off and start a contest prep diet would come, and I'm like, no, I'll take one more year to gain.
Yeah.
And initially, I thought that was kind of a bad thing. I was like, man, just quit being such a chicken, just jump in there and do something. But I think long term, it probably led to just more success immediately once I did start competing. So I'd say I started to look into bodybuilding and potentially competing, I'd say somewhere around 2001, 2002.
Okay.
I didn't make it on stage until 2007.
Wow.
And it was a very, very misguided effort. However, I think one thing became very clear, that once I did get up there, even though my efforts to come in as lean as I thought I needed to come in didn't quite work out, that all that time kind of spent stutter stepping, at least to some extent. I did think it was stutter stepping because I wouldn't commit to a contest prep. It led to a very well developed physique. So by the time I did get up there, I was like, oh wow, I have enough muscle to be competitive. I'm just not quite lean enough. And then the next year we did it again to kind of make up for that last season, and that suspicion was confirmed. I ended up earning pro cards in just about every natural federation that meant anything at the time here in the U.S. And that was partially my plan, because I wanted to have options in regards to where I compete. But looking back now, I think it was one of the two options. I feel that as a young physique athlete, there's probably two major roads that I think that fit most, and I definitely took one of those. I mean, without knowing, of course, but that was definitely, in hindsight, hey, one of the few things I can say that in my youth, in my start, I did quite okay at, was like deciding to take that specific route, which was like waiting a while.
For sure. Yeah, that makes sense totally. And I think, do you think that potentially if you'd been more aware of the natural scene, especially as opportunities for teenagers or juniors, so under the age of sort of 23, to compete, do you think you maybe would have jumped the gun potentially a little bit sooner and competed as a younger individual if you'd been more aware of that?
That's a good question. Yeah, at the time, natural bodybuilding was just not very. You couldn't go online and just pick a few shows. It didn't work that way. They were still getting word around via flyer, basically. It seemed. Yeah. So yeah, the options were quite limited, and whenever I would look into competitions, it was usually the big enhanced local shows. And California, like enhanced local shows, are like quite the daunting task. So I think that's one of the reasons why I guess I supercharged it up, if you will. But I do think that had there been more obvious natural platform for me at the time, I definitely would have jumped on it. And I think that's one thing that a lot of the young athletes today have to. You guys got it really good. You guys know that that it existed. You have that route, and there's options in regards to where you can compete. And here's a big one, right? It's cool, right? It's not like it's a cool thing, and the cool factor is severely underrated sometimes. So it's a good time to be a young physique athlete, natural physique athlete.
Agreed. And I think, the reason I asked that question is because I sort of came from a similar background to you in the fact that I did have lots of other competitive sports that I played prior to bodybuilding, and bodybuilding I needed something to attach myself to competitive wise. I needed to compete to fuel that passion, and I think if if I hadn't have been so aware of the natural scene, it would have been more difficult for me to jump that gun, and I think I potentially would have gone into, maybe powerlifting, etc. Or I would have found something. But it's interesting how things have developed since obviously you competed, and I agree there has been big changes, and now the options you have, especially in the UK and the US, are so huge, especially even for teens. Like some of the teen lineups are insane, and it is really incredible. So the first sort of initial thing I wanted to touch on in terms of the topics of this podcast is that's for context as well. Let's take into account that you have, say, a young individual, and by young I mean under the age of 23, come to you via 3DMJ, consulting for coaching, and they want to obviously start a contest prep. The first question that I have is there anything that prior to the contest prep you would be looking for that younger athlete to have done or to be doing in order to maximize that initial starting point?
Yeah, I think depending on the person, and this goes for adults too.
Yeah.
I think I like to see 2 to 3 years of you just kind of living the lifestyle and enjoying all the things that a lot of other people might not find very enjoyable. Getting your protein in, making sure that you have a good understanding of how nutrition works, and maybe even experience a few fat loss phases, some periods of caloric restriction, not too many obviously, because that can have adverse effects, and mostly psychological, but just like making sure that you have a firm grasp on just a few basic concepts, that you love this. I think that's probably the first thing before you decide, okay, I want to compete. I think especially with a lot of the newer divisions, it's a little bit easier to compete a bit earlier on in your training. And what that does is it allows some people to skip through some of those phases. So they get a gym membership, they hire, local coach X, and, coach is like, all right, this is your training, this is your nutrition. We have 5 months till our first show. And that line of thinking, that assembly line process just doesn't sit well on me. And I think that, I think had I not loved every minute of this, I think at a certain point when I was 16, 17, and, I was bringing protein bars to school, it was kind of odd to my friends, but I loved every minute of it, muscle mags in my backpack, and it was just a part of me at that point. And I would say that the only thing, and this kind of goes back to like, do you like this? Is this really your thing? Had I competed earlier, I feel that that's one thing I would have gotten. Like I would have got to experience, I guess, the contest prep grind, and I guess the act of actually being a competitive natural bodybuilder. And I would have gotten to have a fair assessment as to whether or not I actually enjoy this. But I think even before you get to that point where you're like, all right, let me give this a try run and see if it really is what I think it will be. You need to love this, and it just needs to become almost part of like your culture,
Absolutely. I think that's one of the biggest things that's overlooked in natural in bodybuilding in general. Anyway, it's you wouldn't like. It's a very big task. You wouldn't become like a professional athlete or do something like, play football at an elite level without having the time on the pitch where you just love kicking the ball around with your friends. It's something that I always preach to people that maybe ask me, do you know when I should compete, or they ask for my opinion, and I usually, even before I would even consider looking at their physique, their structure, their muscle, it's like, are you in the gym, 4 or 5 times a week? How long have you done that consistently? And I think that it's just massively overlooked. And sometimes people think that the prep aspect is going to make them fall in love with the gym, and actually sometimes I've seen people fall out of love with the gym as a result of a competition prep. It becomes a struggle. Do you agree? Because you get to that point where you're fatigued, you're tired, and your passion for training has to really be strong to push through that phase. So I totally agree with that point. I think the other thing that I sometimes find difficult with younger individuals is they sometimes, it's harder to gauge where they are from a muscular development standpoint. And do you think that there's any way you can sort of gauge that as a coach? Potentially, you've got someone young coming to you and asking whether they're in a position to compete. How do you gauge that as a coach? And is there any examples where you've perhaps said, no, now's not the right time? And how have you dealt with that?
I think before I go in that direction, I will confirm what you say. What you just said, that the whole, what a contest prep is going to do, it's really going to test this love you have for lifting weights and watching what you eat. It's going to at times be something that you don't necessarily look forward to. And towards the end of a contest prep, that's probably the one thing that, more than anything, I feel, that I kind of, I can't wait for it to be over almost, is the fact that every once in a while I'll have these days where I'm like, I'd rather be doing so many other things other than like being here at the gym today. And that's just not like me. But a young athlete tells me he's ready, he wants to do this. First of all, are you physically ready? There'll be some age groups where perhaps there's really almost no chance that they will, outside of a few unusual cases. How close are they, I guess, physically developed enough to I guess, go out there and not be disappointed by the way they look and actually have a fair shot. And I would say that a very simple way to kind of just gauge this is just like secondary I guess sex characteristics. So the kid is like, I posted a picture of Jeff Alberts on our 3D Muscle Journey Instagram page the other day. It's like 17 years old. Yeah. I think he had like facial hair. He had like just fur and spots everywhere, right? And super muscular. So like you look at him and you're like, oh, you're just one of those kids that, you're just a little ahead of other kids. Mm-hmm. You're probably like a little bit closer to the man version of yourself than your peers. So you could look at those things obviously, but I would say probably with younger competitors, you want them to focus more than anything on the experience, as cliche as that sounds, and fine-tuning a lot of those skills that are going to be useful to them later on when perhaps they're better able to compete. Because, honestly, like the difference between a 16-year-old and an 18-year-old, that could be quite a bit. So they might have to share the stage, and in most cases the 16-year-old is going to be at a huge disadvantage. So I think more than anything it's a good time to prime them on hey, you're gonna learn why having deloads scheduled ahead of time, both dietary and training deloads, is a good thing. Why sleep matters. Why being disciplined and doing certain things that sometimes maybe you don't want to do, or sometimes stopping yourself from doing things is a skill that's going to be of great use to you for a very long time. So I think for a younger individual, I would say first thing among anything besides how they look and are they going to be competitive, is are they taking this with the right approach in mind? And that is it's going to be a great time to learn. Your first prep is never surpass your first prep. Something went horribly wrong from that point forward. But yeah, I'd say it's a good time to take notes for a young competitor, should you choose to compete early, more than anything else, more than like having a physique, like, I don't know, like a lot of those abnormalities that you might see sometimes floating across social media, which seems to be all we really ever pay attention to, I think.
Yeah, that's definitely something I would agree with, and I think social media is almost pressurizing the younger generation to compete potentially too soon, and I think that if an individual is in the teenage category or a junior category, they should look at, like you said, they should look at the bracket and are they potentially optimizing that period of time. For example, if they do want to be sort of a teenage champion, is competing at 16, 17, 18 the right plan, or is it, you take 16, 17 off and compete at 18 or 19, So I think looking at the longer term is probably the best idea for a younger athlete, and that's something that you definitely sort of hit on there. In terms of potentially getting the client on board and say everything's okay, everything's ready to go ahead into a contest prep phase, is there anything that you'd straight away do differently in terms of potentially the time needed for an extended fat loss phase for a younger client? And also I have a really question about, would you even sort of set a show date for them? Because if it's potentially their first ever serious fat loss phase, isn't it quite difficult to gauge exactly when they are going to be lean enough? And would you think that potentially not setting an actual date is going to be potentially more optimal for a younger client?
All right. Let's back up here for a minute. I think that probably, besides like getting, I would say that almost getting lean enough, and I hate to break this to maybe teenagers that are maybe at some point, they're listening in, they're like, hey, at some point we're going to get 3D Muscle Journey to help me get into the best shape possible. I want to be like, Instagram famous, I don't know, Teen X or something, and to me, when you are working with young athletes, it's your responsibility as a coach to leave them in a good place, help them build a good foundation for the rest of their career. And in regards to just getting peeled, like, a lot of those really noteworthy physiques out there, it's just not a good time for a lot of teens. I think I think in the past, people, or in recent times even, people tend to focus a bit more on what happens physically, like a lot of the hormone issues that do come with long-term fat loss phases, especially those that really push you to those ultra lean levels. But to me, I think the biggest stuff, the stuff that tends to have the biggest carryover is the mental stuff. And that's where you want to be the most careful when it comes to these young athletes. And I would tell a 16-year-old who maybe is listening right now that they're like, no, dude, I got this whole being peeled thing. I'd say all the way up until maybe my mid-20s, how much more mature I got every 4 years was almost like clockwork. Like, from 12 to 16 to 20 to 24, I can almost say the same gap that was there from like 12 to 16, in some ways was there from 20 to 24. And coping skills, that's a huge one. That's one that it just takes time, and that's one thing that you're going to need a lot of if you are going to prep and push it that hard. I don't think my first prep I could have. Now it's just like, whatever, just another day in prep. So I would say that especially with a younger athlete, you're going to have to be a lot more patient. Hopefully there's a good communication line so they can really tell you how it is that they're feeling. And again, this is skill building time. It's not a time to build your best physique ever. But if you do focus on the skill building aspect of things, honestly, you're going to surpass anything you would have done had you just focused on that bottom line and getting as peeled as possible. So yeah, I would say that first and foremost with physique, with young physique athletes, you're going to have to be a bit more gentle, because I know so many former physique athletes, they're now doing something else, either just recreational bodybuilders or maybe not, they're powerlifters, but they had one contest prep experience in their teens that to this day they can't shake off, and they've tried numerous times, and these are often even now like very well-adjusted, smart, intelligent, self-aware adults who just they can't lose 10 pounds, they can't lose 15 pounds, and it all goes back to that first little fathom they encountered when they were in their teens. So yeah, I'd say be very patient, and again, like, you're not going to build the most awesome looking physique in your teens, but you can build a foundation that I think a lot of people out there, including myself, foundation not just in regards to, again, physique, but just some of the basic fundamentals that I wish I would have had.
I totally agree then. Again, like, honestly, I think the mental fortitude aspect of contest prep, and something that we've really touched on here, which is so important, is that what you are like prior to the prep, your mentality is going to massively dictate whether you're able to sort of get through unscathed, so to speak. And I think this year, when sort of I've been working with younger guys, the tendency for them to think that, or the tendency for them to have very high expectations of getting extremely lean, it sometimes does them a lot more bad than good. And what I mean by that, I don't know if you all agree, is they'll stress out incredibly easily at the result of their progress not going in the right direction, potentially because they've not done this before and they're not aware of what it's like when things aren't going brilliantly, and that just massively stunts their progress. So I think, yeah, again, agreed, the mental aspect of throughout and prior to the contest prep is super important.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of adults don't leave, and here's a kind of another thing to take into consideration. I've known quite a few adults who actually, prior to the prep, they were always kind of that lean person who just like lived the lifestyle, who people were like, hey, you should compete. They compete, and then after going through that experience, they're just like in total shell shock, and they're never quite the same afterwards. So it's not for everyone. That's for sure. Even some people who would be very likely candidates. So I think it's something that, yeah, I think teenagers should definitely just really double check the small print on, in that, first of all, you don't have to compete. You can be a bodybuilder without necessarily, getting yourself down to those insane levels of body fat. However, I think, again, I didn't compete early on, but I feel that looking back now, one thing I would have gotten from it is like, there would have been some skills I would have developed a bit sooner had I done it right off the bat. And I think that's probably the first reason you want to prep above anything else, so that you can be really good later on, and not necessarily so you can be really good now. Of course, that's easier said than done, and I don't know if I even would have completely have bought into that advice when I was 18, 19.
Sticking on the subject of initial preparations for a minute, is there any sort of characteristics or similarities in terms of their skill set that you've seen with younger athletes coming to you that have done potentially very well? It's just anything that you've potentially noticed that is fairly similar.
I would say that one thing that most young people across the board tend to do a little bit better. This isn't quite as common anymore because things have changed for the better in the last decade or so when it comes to everything fitness. But most teenagers, even if they haven't counted macros, they can figure that stuff out right away. And 1 or 2 weeks later, they're building some really extravagant menus, and there's our thanking you because now they finally cook for themselves, right? They're eating more than just the 5 foods they were eating prior. So yeah, they're very quick learners. So obviously a young mind is quite pliable, quite adaptable to new information, and they just hit the ground running with things. So that's something that you see across the board. And then within the high achievers, I would say that for sure. Athletes that come from some sort of previous athletic background, I feel like that helps tremendously. Whether it be martial arts, they played organized sport, they kind of understand the role of the athlete and the coach, and they kind of know when to just lean on the coach and let me make executive calls on certain things, and when perhaps they need to tell me how it is they're feeling, and they know how to differentiate the difference between, I'd say, good pain and bad pain. So yeah, I think, and to add another layer to that, I think athletes, young athletes who are former athletes in other sports, and then all while being, I guess, stellar students as well, because they've really seen at that point, if you want to do both really well, you're going to have to get good at the whole time management thing. And with a contest prep, that is definitely something that at some point you're going to have to get really good at, is managing your time efficiently. So, and that's something that doesn't, unlike the learning thing, doesn't come quite as naturally to a lot of young people.
Yeah, totally agreed. When it comes to sort of what I've seen with some younger guys, it's definitely that they tend to have a good concept of things prior to even giving them a protocol, and it's more so with that I've found, it's more so with sort of nutrition wise, they tend to have a pretty good concept of consuming enough protein and eating enough calories, and just being consistent with that. That's something that I've found with younger individuals that they've potentially done well. But something I have found, and sort of moving on to the next topic, something I have found with younger individuals is they almost potentially start off on the wrong bat when it comes to training protocols. And I think that this is because maybe they're following the wrong people, maybe they're getting the wrong ideas, or maybe they think that, I don't know. Sometimes I've found it difficult to control a younger individual's work ethic, or want to train a body part until they can no longer move it, and I think trying to get them to transfer onto something that's potentially optimal has sometimes been difficult for me. So obviously what I'd like to do is get as many opinions or valid point of views on the podcast, so people can learn, young individuals can have the confidence to go on to something that's more optimal. So when it comes to training, and maybe not specifically because we can't really massively specifically relate it to a contest prep, but training sort of protocols in general, what would you say in terms of the younger bodybuilder would you do specifically in terms of setup for training?
But yeah, that's probably, like you said, the macros and all that stuff is very, I think they hit the ground running with that. But the training, I mean, when I think back to my teen years, it was like, man, so I slept 12 hours a day. I didn't necessarily have a job. Like, my worries were like that. I didn't have an extremely high work capacity, so I can get away with just kind of going in there and like white knuckling it every single day. But as you know, it only takes you so far, and it's going to be really hard to be great via that method unless you're like one out of, I don't know, like 1,000 people who that's probably about right, who can get away with such an approach, and even those people would probably be that much better, which is scary if they actually had something that made a little bit more sense long term. For most teenagers, yeah, I'd say that the earlier you can get them to buy in to having an approach, and this is where I think they probably will have to, and most bodybuilders, this is kind of how it works, because even with a lot of my old school bodybuilders, the older guys that come to me who want me to take care of their training because they've been doing it a certain way for 20 something years now, and they're having a hard time progressing anymore. We will look at the fact that the whole, having a structure for your nutrition works. Keeping track of your fat, carbs, and protein works. So, hey, when we do that with, frequency, intensity, volume, it seems to work just as well, and we can get unstuck from situations. So I'd say that initially, when you're trying to have someone recover from that, probably the best way to kind of get them to jump on board is to not take everything away, maybe just take certain segments of their program. And as they see that, okay, I'll let you take care of my bench press because I hate my bench press. And here we are 4 months later, and they're like, wow, my bench press has increased 17%. I'm still squatting the same, and my back hurts, and I just haven't made progress in other areas. And they start giving you more and more. So I'd say that the best way to have someone give you the controls that you want, so that they can actually learn what actually works, is to just take a segment at a time, and the evidence will be there, and then eventually they'll be like, okay, we will deload a little bit more frequently than like whenever we're hurt, and it's not about going 105% every single time we're in the gym. But yeah, it's definitely about meeting athletes halfway. It's kind of the same way with nutrition, where you will get people every once in a while who maybe have never followed an actual program and or a flexible dieting type of approach, and I'm pretty sure most of your listeners are familiar with that, and what that outlines, and maybe you have to start off with a menu, and then you're like, okay, meal 4, last meal of the day, you do whatever you want with that meal. And then they're like, oh, I'm getting this. I'm still losing weight, even though I'm picking a new kind of ice cream every night. So same thing goes with training, is, you want to inch there little by little, and eventually, hopefully, you have full athlete buy-in.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's something that I sort of potentially hadn't really thought about in terms of taking it little by little. I'd usually just try and give it them all and get them to accept it, and sometimes it was difficult because they wouldn't accept really any of it, and they'd continue with potentially what they were doing initially in terms of, maybe they'd follow the exercise selection, but they'd just end up doing drop sets and to failure, and their training spreadsheet was looked like bombs hit it, and I'm like, well, what are you doing? And you feel like you're losing the reins. But I think definitely going steady and maybe trial and error with some movements would be a wonderful way to take a young trainee into potentially what's optimal. So I like that a lot. In terms of sort of maybe mistakes that you see younger trainees making when it comes to just their overall structure, what would you say is the most common thing that you see young trainees doing wrong in the gym? Obviously, you know, they can make great progress doing crazy things, but what do you think most people are doing wrong at the moment?
So it's like the exact opposite of that really old guy at the gym that hurt himself doing some interpretation of a squat at some point, and he comes up and he tells you, like, I used to squat and now I'm hurt, you shouldn't squat. And it's like, you probably never actually did squat, you know, just like by watching you do everything else you're doing, you called it a squat, but it probably wasn't, and that's what hurt you. With younger people, it's the exact opposite. They've never, in most cases, have experienced any sort of weight room injury, and I would say is perhaps having technique that is not timeless. And by timeless, sometimes you can do something or move a weight in a manner that it got you that lift right then and there. You got your reps that you wanted, you got the weight that you wanted, but can we add anything on top of that? So we've all seen that person that you're like, yeah, they did it and that was impressive, but like their thoracic spine was like rolled over on that like back squat PR. I don't think we can like progress with that. So I would say not making timeless technique a high enough priority, because when you stop and if you were to stop most lifters, serious lifters who've done this for, we'll throw just a number out there like 10 years, and you ask them what's been the one thing that slowed you down the most, it's hardly ever is it like, oh, I ran some crappy programming the first 3 or 4 years. Usually it's some sort of injury. So I would say that having technique that, of course, like lets you progress in a correct manner for a long period of time is key. And then also by default, that timeless technique is also going to help you stay healthier, and that's super important. And that's maybe, I know, something that when I was younger I didn't think about. Like I would go lift weights, go play basketball, someone would roll into my knee and it would bend in the weirdest way, and I'm like, I'm squatting tomorrow, I'm fine. It was just a much more fresh body with less mileage. But yeah, I would say that don't wait until you're hurt to actually start, making that part or taking preventative measures to avoid that. If people who can avoid being hurt, that's one of some of the freakiest, strongest people are people who I know have done an excellent job of doing that. Bryce Lewis is a sensational example of that. When you look at his deadlift was in the mid 400s. No one knew who Bryce was, but here he is, deadlifting over 8 now. When you look at the average between 400 and 800 and how much he put on every single year, it's nothing out of the ordinary. He's just never like taken a step back because he doesn't really get hurt. So you want to be that freaky strong person, don't get hurt for 15 years, and people will think you're an abnormality.
That's a really good comment there. I think that again, with like what we spoke about when it comes to nutrition, them younger people just getting it and understanding it. I think younger people get progressive overload and they get that they should be adding weight to the bar to get bigger, but what they don't get is that at some point their linear progression may slow, and there are ways and means to get around it. Whereas I think the ways and means that they get around it is they get hurt and then they maybe find the more optimal route. I don't think that sort of personally I got hurt. I just got reminded that I was going to get hurt if I continued to do what I was doing. And I remember sort of as little as 2 years ago getting sort of called out on my squat being like a half rep by a guy that was coaching me. And I was like, oh, okay, well, that's not a full squat. So I started full squatting and obviously made great progress from there as soon as I started to squat well. Same with deadlift, same with bench press. It's all accustomed to itself, and I think that is a really good point for young individuals to take away, is that if you do want to get extremely strong, you shouldn't get hurt, and you should be taking the more optimal route when it comes to progression. So yeah, I really do think that's something that a lot of people will probably write down as a take-home point. So when it comes to setting up sort of a younger athlete's, and I sort of want to quickly touch on this, a younger athlete's nutrition for a contest prep. Obviously, we touched on earlier about the fact that you wouldn't want to put them off possibly competing in the future, or put them off the idea of bodybuilding whatsoever. So would you be more inclined to take maybe a potentially a slower, less aggressive approach to a contest prep, and maybe just outline quickly how that would potentially work in terms of maybe calorie cuts, etc.?
I would say it would probably slow down more so because we'd have more frequent diet breaks.
Okay, I see.
Maybe somewhere to maybe every 4 to 5 weeks or something like that.
Wow.
That'll probably be the main thing that slows things down. And then kind of in the back of my mind, I would have and I think I can do this now because I've been helping people get ready for shows for just like ever now, that I have a general idea of how I'm going to let this person get before I really start giving him the Spanish Inquisition. And I just like, all right, so how are you doing? Get your mom on the Skype, because like she's going to tell me whether or not what you're telling me is true. All that stuff. And I kind of go back to, and I will finish this answer, but
That's fine.
This was tangent. There was a few years back where I had this this young lady I was coaching who it kind of, I remember at the time it broke her heart when I was like, you know what, I'm not going to push you much further than this, because I thought a lot of her behaviors when it came to food weren't necessarily timeless, right? There was a few things that that were just so out of her ordinary that I'm like, we'll just kind of hold it here. You look really good. You can do really well, but I don't want this to be the last prep you ever have. And after the contest prep, we talked, and she expressed how she was very disappointed with that decision, and that she wished we could have pushed a little bit harder. And I think it's been a total of about 4 years now since that prep. And it's funny because it's the exact opposite now. It's like, wow, she totally understands where that came from and why we did what we did. So yeah, it's odd because you totally feel like a parent sometimes, because I mean, there's things that our parents tell us, and for the teenager that hasn't gotten to the point where you're a young adult and you can think of things that your parents told you as a teen that you're like, I get it now. Just go back to when you were like 8 or 9, and there was times where your parents were like, oh, you can't run after your sister with scissors. That's just probably not going to end right. And you'd understand at the time, but I think that's one of the importance of having a coach, and that's one of the reasons that, again, former athletes, they've had that coach-athlete dynamic over and over, and they understand how that works, and they understand that coach in general is like, they're there because they want to see them do their best, not because we want to slow down their growth. And if anything, the goal of a coach is to like long-term make it faster than it would have been otherwise. So yeah, I would say that you might want to have a few landmark body fats that you're like, okay, this is like a fun, safe body fat for this person to hang around at. And then we'll have a really in-depth chat about how they're feeling, how they're doing when it comes to everything else in their life, their friends, their family, school, that sort of stuff. And I'd say the main thing that slows it down is going to be not necessarily the rate of loss, young people tend to be very predictable, and I just think it's because usually their need expenditure just tends to be a little bit more consistent throughout the day. But they do need more frequent breaks, I feel, because again, their ability to cope with caloric restriction is still a fairly new skill, or it should be in most cases. So yeah, diet breaks is probably what's going to slow it down, because again, if you're doing it every 4 weeks over a 24-week diet, that's 6 diet breaks that you're going to have. But I think they're much needed for younger athletes.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's something that I potentially could have done more frequently for myself. I think the reason that would have helped me is because I was lean for a long period of time. So when I did get to that stage, it was very difficult to maintain. Because I was trying to get leaner and leaner, and it wasn't paying off. And that at that point, I definitely think that taking a diet break or having someone instruct me to take a diet break would have been good. And I think alongside that, I made sure that I learned from that lesson in the people that I coach, and I sort of made sure that I was understanding what was going on. And I think when you sort of talked to me about that girl that you were coaching, it's obvious that you had a good relationship with that person, because they could you could understand what was going on with their relationship with food, etc. And I think that's something people need to realize, especially when they have a coach. It's like you've got to be as honest as possible, and really relay what the current situation is. And something that I took, especially from you guys, is sort of the idea of getting athletes to check in via video format rather than written text. And that's something that's massively helped me in terms of determining how an individual's actually feeling, because it's quite easy to hide behind text. And I think that's something potentially people need to realize.
Yes, you'll get that report that I'm okay. Just I don't have time this week. Here it goes. Like, no, that's probably not what it is. Send me a video, and I don't care if it's late. Send me a video, and then you'll see exactly how they're doing. And that's a big part of being an athlete, is kind of knowing where that limit is. And a lot of people aren't necessarily comfortable with even saying that there is a limit, that there's just that they have like will tanks that can only hold so much. But again, that's where a great coach-athlete relationship comes into play. And if you do it right, you can help impact a young person's life in ways that extend far past that contest prep, for sure.
Agreed. Yeah, and I think that the main thing people should take away from this is that a lot of part of a successful sort of young athlete is going to be behind the nutrition and the training, and it's more to do with the sort of the mental side of things as opposed to maybe the physical, especially when it comes to sort of just getting over that initial hurdle of the first contest prep. So to wrap things up, Alberto, I'd like you to sort of give your honest opinion as to younger athletes competing, and maybe just give your idea as to whether you think an individual sort of under 20, let's say, should be competing, and maybe give the sort of the pros and the cons to someone doing so, and give your actual opinion.
Well, I think bodybuilding in general is like for more people than people believe. I think if more people should be lifting weights, eating a high protein diet, and when they think of mass population, when they think of fitness, they think of cardiovascular fitness, and like that's very incorrect way of looking at it, I feel. So more people should be bodybuilders, I feel. Should more people be competitive bodybuilders? Probably less than there is out there. And I totally understand, like, you're scrolling through social media, and you see a physique that inspires you, and you look a little deeper into it and you're like, wow, this looks like fun. It looks like something I'd like to give a go at. I can understand that, 'cause that's kind of how I started. I think I picked up it was a WNBF magazine at some point, and it was the first time I'd seen like natural competitors, and I'm like, hey, this looks like fun, and the shows are really hyped up on here, and it's like, hey, I can see myself doing something like this and hopefully being on one of these magazines at some point. But I feel that, especially now for a lot of people, it's just like, it's almost like the trendy thing to do. There's a lot of other trendy things you can do that are like, I'd say, going to be a whole lot healthier than taking up a competitive sport, like being a physique athlete across any division, from bikini to all the way to bodybuilding, just because of just how demanding it's going to be at times. It's just a can of worms, and I think it's something that should be best left like for the people who like legitimately like yearn to push themselves in that manner, and not necessarily. There's this one really good quote, and my friend Devin posted it. He was quoting someone else, so this man's not going to get credit for it because I don't know where it came from, but it went something along the lines of like, some people like to bodybuild, and then some people like themselves in bodybuilding, and I'm like, yeah, I like to bodybuild, and I think I give this world, like if Armageddon happened, I was the last person on this planet. At some point, once I got my stuff together and I created a weight room and protected it from all the wild animals, I'd probably at some point I'd probably emaciate myself for fun and see, how muscle to fat ratio I could, like weird muscle to fat ratio I can create and see if it's better than last time, But no one would be there. There'd be no one to see my selfie. It'd be like purely because I enjoy the process. I love everything that goes into that. And I think that's the thing that people need to ask themselves before they jump into it is like, why are you doing this? And you need to have external motivation. Fine, that's good. We all have some of that in there, but there should be a part of it that's like simply just for you.
Absolutely. And I think again, the things that we've hit on are so true for younger competitors when it comes to deciding whether they should take that leap or not. And I think that it totally depends on all the variables that they're trying to control. It's all dependent on whether they are ready or not. And quite often you won't find out until it's too late, and that's unfortunate, obviously, if that does happen. But hopefully, if anyone is listening to this and does do the right thing and take the points home, then they will realise that they need to potentially consider sort of their starting point from a mentality perspective, and whether they're going to be able to sort of see it through. So yeah, I definitely think there's been some wonderful take homes from this podcast, Alberto, and I'd like to really thank you for spending some time here and giving up your time today. I know you're a bit under the weather as well, so I really appreciate it. And before we go, just basically I'd like to give you a chance to sort of give people links to wherever they can follow you. If they're not already, they probably are, but just sort of maybe say where you're most active on social media and where people can follow you.
Yeah, YouTube, Team 3DMJ channel. That's where myself, my squad, Team 3D Muscle Journey, we're pretty active there as a team. And then from there, we're all active on Instagram. I'm very active on Instagram, often Snapchat, but mostly Instagram. And I think we do a pretty good job of just keeping things fun, educational. And yeah, we're always looking for new people to jump on board. So if you haven't, check us out. We do some pretty cool things, all of us. And yeah, next year I will be prepping. And I want this to be my year. So I will emaciate myself to the point where I will be unrecognizable, and I'd love that. I love it. Like I honestly can't wait. So follow that.
I'm really excited to follow that. And I think, I'm probably going to be, if not, well, I will be prepping as well next year. So I will be using your vlogs, your updates as motivation. I think the first time I potentially reached out to 3DMJ was, I remember watching Jeff Albert's prep vlogs. So I watched all of them, and yours, of course. And I reached out to Jeff a long time ago about how they helped, because I won one of my shows, and I just had to thank him because I felt like they pushed me through to get lean enough. So definitely I would 100% recommend anyone to follow the channel, and definitely look back, like select the old videos and watch the very old ones, because they're super interesting and very raw, and just someone speaking in front of a camera with a headset on, and it's all good.
The ever-changing face that happens during contest prep.
Yeah. It's awesome. No, it's definitely great stuff. And yeah, again, Alberto, thank you very much for your time today. And yeah, for all the listeners, please give the podcast a like if you're listening on YouTube, and share it about to sort of anyone that you think will benefit from it. And yeah, keep subscribed and stay up to date for episode 21. And I thank you guys very much for watching. Alberto, you got anything else to leave?
No, that is it. Stay healthy, live hard, and love what you do.
Cool. Thanks, guys.